made to stand in the corner through every family meal. A Lakota chief pulled out her chair. The chair is what I keep coming back to. Not the look on her face, not the words she said after, just the chair. Maple wood. One leg shorter than the other three, so it always rocked a little if you weren't careful how you sat. She knew that. She'd reach under the table before she sat down and wedge a flattened cork she kept in her apron pocket under that short leg, quiet as settling a sleeping child. She did it every night without looking. Just knew. I know because I watched her. I watched her for a long time before she ever looked back. My name is Lakota Whitehorse. I was born in the moon of popping trees, which the white calendar calls January, in the year 1841, in a camp along the White River that does not exist anymore. My father was charging bull, a headman. My mother was a woman called Walks Far because she did. She walked everywhere she needed to go, and she made it. I learned that from her, that walking somewhere on your own legs is worth more than arriving any other way. I tell you these things because they matter. Because what I am going to tell you happened to a man with a specific history, not a shadow, not a figure from a painting in some Eastern gallery. A man who had already outlasted things that should have killed him 3 times over by the time he sat down to a meal with a woman named Clara Briggs, who handed him a bread roll without being asked, and looked at him, not at his coat, not at his boots, not at the space just past his left ear the way most white people do, but at him, the way you look at a person whose face matters to you. I am 61 years old now. I have been a great many things in those years. Chief of what remained of my band, the rump of a rump by the time I took that weight, 37 people in a draw near the reservation line, none of them young. Before that, a scout for the army, which is its own kind of story and not a proud one in all its parts. Before that, a man who buried his wife and son in the same week from fever, and who did not speak for 6 months afterward because there was nothing worth saying. And before all of that, before the grief and the scouting and the slow dying away of everything I knew, I was simply my father's son, learning to read weather and river, and the small signals a horse gives when it is about to bolt. I did not expect to love again. I want to say that plainly because some men tell these stories and they make themselves into someone who was just waiting for the right woman to unlock them, and that is not how it was. I was not waiting. I was finished. I had made my peace with being finished. Clara Briggs did not unlock me. She just refused to pretend I was a door. This was 1902. The town was called Eldon, Kansas, railroad town, 12 years old and already tired. One main street with a hardware store, a feed operation, a barber shop that doubled as a dentist's chair, and at the far end the Eldon House, which was a hotel and restaurant that tried to be better than the town around it and mostly succeeded. I came through Eldon 3 or 4 times a year. I knew the livery man, Pete Sorrow, half Osage himself, and no fool about what that meant in a town like this. And Pete rented me a stall for my horse and a cot in the tack room without asking me to sleep behind the building. That was the arrangement, and it suited us both. The Eldon house had changed hands in the spring. I heard about it from Pete before I saw it for myself. A company of women had come out from the east on a plan, trained to run dining rooms. The story went, all of them capable, all of them with their own reasons for being on that particular train headed that particular direction. The new dining room opened in April. By June, it was the cleanest, most orderly eating establishment between Dodge and the Colorado line. I did not go in the first time I came through after it opened, or the second. The third time I came through was late October, first freeze already down on the high grass, and Pete told me the kitchen was open until 9, and the soup that night was venison, real venison, not the stringy government beef they called venison when they wanted to charge more for it. He said it plain, "Whitehorse, you ought to go eat something hot." I knew what he wasn't saying. He wasn't saying they'd let me in. He was saying he thought they would, and he was telling me to try, and that was Pete being a friend, which he was, so I went. I pushed open the front door of the Eldon house at 7:30 on an October evening, and I stood in the entryway, and I counted 6 tables, 4 of them occupied, lamps burning with clean wicks, smell of wood smoke and something that had been slow-cooked all day. The woman behind the front counter looked up, not away, not down, up at my face. "Good evening," she said. "One?" I said yes. She picked up a menu card, the kind printed proper, not a chalkboard, and she led me to a table near the window, which was not the table in the corner, which was not the table beside the kitchen door, which was not the worst table in the place hidden from other diners. It was a table by the window with a clear view of the room. She pulled out the chair. I have eaten at a lot of tables in my life. Army mess tables where a sergeant made it clear my presence was tolerated and nothing more. Reservation agent's table where I sat to sign papers and was not offered coffee. The tables of white ranchers I scouted for, where I ate after the family and before the hands, standing up in the kitchen because no one had thought to include me in the arrangement. Treaty tables where I sat because I had to, not because anyone wanted me there. She pulled out the chair as though it was the most natural thing in the world, as though there was no other table I would possibly sit at, as though the window and the lamp and the clean white cloth were exactly where a man like me belonged. I sat down. Her name was Clara Briggs, and I did not know that yet. I knew only that she was maybe 35, dark-haired, wearing a plain dark dress with a white collar, and that she moved through her dining room the way a good rider moves on a good horse, not showing off, not fighting anything, just easy and certain in the direction she wanted to go. She brought the soup. She brought bread without my asking. She refilled my coffee twice and let me eat in peace, and when I was done she brought a small piece of dried apple cake and set it down and said, "On the house, we made too much." I said, "You didn't make too much." She looked at me a moment and then she smiled, just a small one, the kind that reaches the eyes before the mouth. "No," she said, "we didn't." I paid what I owed and left a fair tip and walked back to Pete's livery in the October cold, and I stood in the stall with my horse for a while, my hand on his neck, feeling his warmth, not thinking about much. That was the first night. I need to tell you about the corner, because it is the other half of what she undid. My mother's people had a custom when receiving guests of different tribes or different status. The guest of highest honor sat at the back of the lodge, farthest from the door, safest from any threat that might enter. To be placed at the back was respect. To be placed near the door was an insult, or a practical acknowledgement that you were not expected to stay. White people have their own version of this, though they would not frame it so cleanly. The corner table, the kitchen door table, the table that catches the draft every time someone comes in, those are the door seats. I had been a door seat my whole life in white establishments, when I was allowed in at all. I was 11 years old the first time I understood what the corner meant. My father had dealings with an agent named Horace Kettler, and Horace Kettler fancied himself a progressive man, which meant he invited my father to Sunday dinner at the agency house. My father brought me because he wanted me to see how white men lived and how they thought about themselves. We arrived at the agency house and Mrs. Kettler met us at the door, and she was gracious in the way of a woman performing graciousness, and she led my father to the table, and she seated him and the other white men present, and then she took me by the shoulder, gently, not rough. She thought she was being kind, and she walked me to the corner of the dining room and she said, "You can stand here where you can see everything." My father did not look at me. He was looking at the men around the table, reading them the way he read weather. He was working. I understood that. I stood in the corner and I watched the meal, and I was not offered a plate. That is where I learned. Not just that I was not welcome. I had known that since before I had words for it, but that the not welcoming came in gradations. There was the door that stayed shut, and there was the door that opened partway and let you stand in the frame and watch but not enter, and the second kind was supposed to feel like a gift. After that I ate before or after or alone when I could. When I couldn't, army messes, supply depots, treaty houses. I sat where I was put and I ate what I was given, and I kept my face the way my father had taught me to keep it. Open, still, reading. Not performing patience, just waiting until I was somewhere else. 50 years of that. 50 years of corners and kitchen doors and men who looked at the space beside my ear. 50 years of being seen as an obstacle or a curiosity, or at best, a useful piece of equipment that could ride and track and keep its mouth shut. Clara Briggs pulled out a window seat and set down a bread roll I hadn't asked for. You understand, maybe, what that meant, or maybe you don't, and that's all right too. I'm telling it as plain as I know how. I came back the next time I was through Eldon, which was December. Hard winter by then, the ground iron, my breath coming in clouds as I rode in from the north. Pete was glad to see me, fewer people passing through in December, and Pete was a man who liked to talk when he had someone worth talking to. He told me over a tin cup of bad coffee that the Eldon House women had been in town 8 months, and they had changed things. The Saturday men didn't carve their names in the tables anymore because Clara Briggs had looked at one who tried it and said something quiet, and the man had stopped. The food came out hot and in the order it was ordered, which had not always been the case under the previous operation. And every woman who worked there had her own money and her own room and her own set of hours, not negotiable, which was also different. Town can't quite decide if it respects them or resents them, Pete said. Usually both, I said. He nodded. That was our experience in different registers. I went to the Eldon House that night. Different lamp, same white cloth, same short-legged chair at the window table. I noticed the chair because it rocked a half-inch when I sat down, and Clara appeared with the cork without my saying anything, crouched and wedged it under the short leg, and was standing up and pouring water before I'd taken my coat off. You remember the chair, I said. I remember chairs, she said, and who sits in them. I thought about that a long time over my meal. Before I left, I asked her how they'd come to be in Eldon, her group of women, because it seemed a strange destination. She set down the coffee pot and she told me, brief and plain, that some of them had come to find better work and some had come to leave something behind them, and she was in the second category, and she did not volunteer more than that, and I did not ask. That seemed like the right way to handle each other's history. And you, she said, through for business. I told her I had a small herd to sell in Dodge, would be back through heading north. She said she would be here. She said it like it was information and not a promise, but I was 53 years old and I knew the difference. The sell went well enough. Better than I'd expected, given the market, given what year it was, given that a Lakota man selling cattle in Kansas ran up against certain assumptions about who the cattle had belonged to before they were his. I had papers. I always had papers. I had learned that lesson cost me once badly, before I learned it, that a man like me needed papers for things that other men just had, in their face and their hands and the way they stood, by virtue of being what they were. I came back through Eldon on a Thursday evening in January, cold enough that my teeth ached the moment I dismounted. Pete had my stall ready. He knew my schedule well enough by then to just have it ready. I ate at the Eldon House. Clara brought the soup and the bread and the coffee, and then she sat down across from me, which she had not done before, and said, "Tell me something true." I considered that. "My horse," I said, "is the best animal I have ever owned, and I would rather lose the herd than lose him. I do not say that to anyone because people think it's sentiment." "It isn't," she said. "No," I said, "it's knowledge. He has pulled me out of 3 situations I had no right to survive." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "What do you know about the country north of here, around the Niobrara?" I knew a great deal about it. I told her. She listened the way people listen when they are actually thinking about what you're saying, not just waiting for their turn to talk. She asked good questions, practical ones about water and grass and winter severity, not romantic ones about wildness or beauty. She was thinking about something specific. I didn't know what yet. Why? I finally asked. I'm thinking about whether there's ground worth having up there, she said. This operation won't run forever under these terms. The company will want to renegotiate eventually. I'm thinking about what comes after. I told her the names of 3 draws I knew that had reliable water, good southern exposure, grass that held well into October. I told her which one I would pick if it were me. She listened to all 3 and then she said, "That one," pointing at the 3rd one before I'd finished the sentence, because she'd already made her own assessment from what I'd described. She was right, it was the 3rd one. I said so. She smiled again, the real one, eyes first. "Go on," she said. "Finish your soup, it's getting cold." Spring came. I passed through Eldon 4 times between March and August, and I ate at the Eldon house each time, and Clara sat across from me at some point in the evening each time, and we talked. Not about soft things. About land prices and cattle grades, and where the railroad was likely to push next, and what that would do to the small operators, and whether the reservation agent at Pine Ridge was corrupt or merely incompetent. She had opinions and she stated them. When I disagreed with her, I said so. She didn't soften when I pushed back. She either held her position or adjusted it based on what I'd said, and either way she told me why. That was rare. That was rarer than I can say. In May, a man named Garrett Holt started coming into the Eldon house in the evenings. He ran cattle west of town, had money, and had been a widower for 2 years and was no longer interested in being one. He was 47 or so, broad through the shoulder, not a bad-looking man. He was polite to Clara in the calculating way of a man who wants something and has decided politeness is the efficient path to it. I watched this and said nothing. It was not my place to say anything. I was a Lakota man who ate at the window table 3 times a month. Clara Briggs did not owe me an accounting of her evenings. But I watched, and what I saw was Clara being courteous and opaque, the way she was with all of it, efficient, warm enough not to be unkind, and giving away exactly nothing. One evening in June, Garrett Holt was at a table near the back when I came in. He watched me cross the room. He watched Clara pull out the window chair for me and bring the bread without my asking. He watched her sit down across from me when the room quieted later in the evening, the way she had started doing as a matter of course. He left early that night. He was back the next week and the week after that. I don't tell this to make him a villain, he wasn't particularly. He was a man who wanted something and pursued it, which is not unusual. He had simply decided, looking at me, that he did not need to consider me in his calculation. That was his mistake. Late July, I was in the livery unsaddling my horse when Pete came in with an expression I knew on him. Something happened, and not good. He told me that 2 nights ago, after closing, Garrett Holt had come to the back door of the Eldon house and asked to speak to Clara alone. What he said, Pete didn't know exactly, but he knew what Clara had told one of the other women afterward. That Holt had suggested she was spending too much time with the wrong kind of company, and that a woman in her position would do well to think about how that looked to the town. I stood with my hand on my horse's flank for a while. He turned his head and looked at me. "What did she say to him?" I asked. Pete almost smiled. She told him the Eldon house had a policy of welcoming all paying guests, and that the policy wasn't subject to the personal opinions of non-staff, and that she hoped he enjoyed his soup. I stood there a moment longer. And then she asked him to use the front door in the future, like everyone else. I went to the Eldon house the next evening. I sat at the window table. Clara brought the soup and the bread and poured the coffee, and when she set down the pot she did not move away immediately. She stood there and she said, without preamble, I hear you know what Holt said to me. Pete told me, I said. I'm sorry he said it. Don't be sorry for what he said. He said what a lot of people think. I know. She looked at me for a moment, not the quick professional look of a woman running a dining room, but something steadier. Does it cost you anything, she said, coming in here? I thought about how to answer that. It would have, I said, 5 years ago in a different town. Here, no. People have gotten used to me. I'm good for $30 a month in this dining room, which is a fact Pete has made sure people know. She almost smiled. Does it cost you anything, I said, my coming in? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Holt won't come back. A few others have said things. The ones who matter haven't. I nodded. She sat down. I want to tell you something, she said, and I want you to hear it as what it is, which is plain information, not, she paused, deciding on words, not a woman who doesn't know her own mind. All right, I said. I came west because I needed to go somewhere that what I'd been wasn't the whole story of me. That happens. You start over and people see the start, not what came before. She folded her hands on the table. But I've noticed something being here. When you come in, you bring a whole history that everyone can see and has opinions about, whether you want them to or not. And you carry that without making it the room's problem. That's not a small thing. I said, neither is what you just said. She looked at me, just looked. The Niobrara, I said. The third draw I told you about. I filed on it in April. A silence, then you did. 160 acres on a 5-year improvement claim. I have water rights on the eastern branch. She was still looking at me. I held it. I thought about what you said, I said, about what comes after this. I did not press anything after that night. I am telling this story and I want to be honest about the parts where I didn't know what I was doing, where I was just living through days and not certain of what they added up to. August was busy. The herd needed water moved because the South Creek dropped, and there was a fence dispute with a neighbor that took 3 weeks to settle, and 2 of my people were sick and needed things from town that cost money I hadn't planned to spend. I came through Eldon in late August and ate, and Clara sat across from me, and we talked about the fence dispute, and she had a practical observation about the property line language that I passed to Pete, who knew a surveyor. It was ordinary. It sounds ordinary now, and it was ordinary then. A man and a woman who talked and thought together and had, by that time, become, I didn't have the word for it at the time. Not friends, though that. Not anything with a formal name. In September, she asked me to show her the draw. She said it simply. She was clearing plates and she set down the stack and she said, I want to see that land, the third one. Would you take me out there? I said yes. We rode out on a Saturday, her on a good-footed bay she'd borrowed from Pete, me on my horse, northeast out of Eldon into the grass country that opened up flat and broad, and then started rolling toward the Niobrara breaks. It was early September and the light was going sideways and golden, and the grass was tipped with it. She rode well, not a show-off, just someone who'd learned early and retained it, sitting easy and not fighting the horse. I showed her the draw. We rode down into it from the east rim and she was quiet as we came down through the cottonwoods to the creek, late season low but clear, running over limestone, cold. And she stepped down from the horse, and she walked to the water and crouched and put her hand in it. She was quiet a long time. The grass will hold in here, I said. Southern slope keeps the snow off through February usually. Water's reliable. I've known this place 20 years. She stood up and looked around at the walls of the draw, not high, just enough to break the wind, and at the flats above where the grass was thick and the ground drained well. There's room for a house and a barn, and still leave a third of the bottom land in grass, I said. The improvement claim requires a structure in 3 years. She turned and looked at me. I held it. Lakota, she said. My name whole. The way she said it was not a foreign word she'd learned to be polite. It was a name that belonged to a person she was looking at. I'm asking, I said, if you might want to share it." She didn't say anything for a moment. The creek ran. My horse dropped his head and drank. "I have a dining room to finish running," she said. "I know. And the company will renegotiate in spring. The terms may not hold." "I know. And you," she stopped, started again. "What is it that you need from this? Be plain." I thought about that. Then I said, "I'm 61 years old and I have been a corner man my whole life. Not asking for sympathy, that's just the fact of it. I want to build something on ground that's mine, and I want to share it with someone whose opinion I trust. And I would rather—" I stopped, looked at her. "I would rather it was you than anyone." She looked at me for a long time. Not deciding. I don't think she was deciding. I think she'd already decided something before she asked me to bring her here. She was, I think, just looking at me the way she had from the first night. At me, not around me. "All right," she said. "Just that." We married that November, a Wednesday, at the Eldon courthouse, with Pete and one of the other Eldon house women as witnesses. It was not a large ceremony. Clara did not want a large ceremony, and neither did I. We signed the papers and shook hands with the county clerk, and Pete insisted on a dinner at the Eldon house. The 5 of us, closing the dining room to do it. And that night Clara made the soup herself, and she brought it to the table, and she sat down beside me and across from Pete, and she looked entirely at peace with what the day had been. Pete made a toast. He said something about water finding its level, which was very Pete, a man who expressed sentiment by pointing at something true about the physical world. I said nothing because there was nothing left to say that the day hadn't already said. We moved to the draw in the following spring. The house took most of that first summer, 2 rooms, solid, not hasty, with a porch on the south side that caught the afternoon light and a root cellar that kept through August. Clara planted a kitchen garden on the sheltered east side of the house, and it did better than either of us expected. I built a proper barn in the second year, which is when I felt it was real. A barn means you're planning beyond the season you're in. People came. Not many, and not at first, but they came. A few of my band settled nearby. Good ground draws people who need good ground. 2 families of Norwegian homesteaders took quarter sections up on the flat above us, and we traded labor and information and got along. Clara traded preserves and medicines for things we needed, and she was generous with both and didn't count overly, which is how you build something in a place like that. The Eldon house eventually renegotiated in terms Clara wouldn't take, so she left, and she brought the knowledge of how to run a clean kitchen table, and she started a small boarding house enterprise out of 2 extra rooms we added on, and travelers came through on their way to and from Dodge and paid fair rates for a clean bed and a real meal, and that was good for 3 years until the main road shifted, and then it wasn't, and that was all right too. We turned those rooms into something else. There were hard years. Of course there were. A drought year that took the garden and thinned the herd. A winter that killed 3 cows and came close to taking Pete when he came to stay because his livery had burned and he had nowhere else. A year where my knee gave out and I couldn't ride properly for 6 months and had to ask for help, which did not come naturally to me. And Clara observed this without comment and simply organized the help and placed it in front of me without asking permission. And I took it because she had made it easy to take, and that was something. I want to tell about one morning. The second winter in the draw, February, cold enough that the creek stiffened over at the edges. I was up before light, as I always was, and I had the stove going and the coffee on, and I was standing at the window looking at the dark shape of the draw in the pre-dawn, the cottonwoods just black lines, the eastern sky not yet showing any color. Clara came up behind me and put her hand between my shoulder blades, flat, warm, and she stood there with me looking at the dark. "It's going to snow," I said. "I know," she said. We stood there a while longer. "You all right?" she said. I thought about that. I thought about what it meant that she asked, and what it meant that she asked it here, in this draw on this ground, in this house I had built, beside this woman who had ridden out and put her hand in the water and said, "All right." "Yeah," I said. "I am." She pressed her hand flat against my back a moment more. Then she went and got 2 cups and poured the coffee, and we stood together at the window and watched the color come into the eastern sky, slow and particular, the way it does in February when it means snow, that low pewter rose, and the cottonwoods came out of the dark one branch at a time. That is what I mean when I say I am all right. Not that every hard thing turned good or every wound healed clean, but that I was standing in my own kitchen on my own ground with my own coffee, and a woman beside me whose hand I could feel between my shoulder blades and whose opinion I trusted above every other person living, and the day was just beginning, and we had not yet decided what it would hold. The chair was maple wood, 1 leg short. She always had the cork. She always knew where I sat. That's the whole of it. That is the whole story.